My name is Emma Collins, and the day we buried my father was the day I thought my world shattered for the first time. Standing under a gray, heavy sky, I clutched a bundle of damp tissues in my hand, as if they could shield me from the weight of what was happening. The cemetery was filled with the sound of rustling coats, distant coughs, and the low murmur of prayers, but to me it all blurred into a single hollow silence. My father had been my anchor, the figure who seemed larger than life even when age had started to weaken him. To me, he was the man who taught me how to ride a bike in our suburban street, who stayed up late to help me with math problems even though numbers frustrated him, who smiled with that quiet pride every time I achieved something small. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he was my dad. And as I stood there, staring at the polished wood of his coffin, it felt impossible to believe that this was how his story ended. Around me, family and friends gathered, their faces etched with grief. My mother stood at the front, her black veil trembling with each shaky breath she took. My younger brother, Michael, stood stiffly beside her, his jaw clenched as though holding back tears would somehow keep him strong. Relatives I hadn't seen in years pressed into the rows of folding chairs, clutching handkerchiefs, whispering condolences. I remember thinking how surreal it felt, this ritual of finality. The flowers laid carefully on the casket, the polished shoes sinking slightly into damp earth, the priest's voice rising and falling in solemn rhythm. Everyone seemed to know their place, their role in this performance of grief. But inside I felt lost, as though none of it was real. As I lowered my gaze, I noticed faces I didn't recognize. A few rows back, near the edge of the gathering, a woman stood with 2 children, a boy and a girl, both in their teens. They weren't dressed like mourners who had come to support us. Their posture was different, watchful. The woman's expression was difficult to read. Her eyes were locked on the coffin, her lips pressed tightly together, and though tears glistened in her eyes, she made no move to step closer or join the circle of mourners. Something about her presence unsettled me. Who was she? How did she know my father? Why hadn't I ever seen her before? I tried to focus on the service, but my gaze kept pulling back to her. The way the girl clutched the woman's hand, the way the boy looked down at the ground as though avoiding attention. It didn't feel like they were strangers paying respects. It felt personal, too personal. When the service ended, people drifted toward us with soft voices, offering condolences, sharing stories of my father's kindness, his dedication, his laugh. Each word was like a balm and a blade at the same time, comforting yet piercing because no words could bring him back. I thanked them all, nodding politely, trying to hold myself together. But my eyes searched the crowd, looking for that woman again. For a moment I thought I had imagined her, but then I saw her standing apart, her children still at her side watching us. She didn't come forward, didn't offer condolences. She just watched. Something deep inside me shifted, a faint unease stirring through the fog of grief. I brushed it aside, telling myself this was not the time to ask questions, not the place to start pulling at threads. Today was about saying goodbye, honoring the man I thought I knew. And yet, as we drove away from the cemetery, that woman's face lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. At the time, I had no idea how much that shadow would grow. No idea that the funeral, which I believed to be the closing of my father's story, was actually the beginning of a secret he had taken to his grave. In the days following my father's funeral, the world seemed strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you but presses against your chest, making it hard to breathe. The house was full of flowers and sympathy cards, reminders of how many people respected and cared for him. Yet even surrounded by these tokens of love, I felt a gnawing emptiness inside me. My mother threw herself into routines, cleaning endlessly as though scrubbing counters and folding laundry could erase grief. My brother buried himself in work, spending long hours at the office, avoiding conversations that threatened to unravel him. And me? I wandered through the house like a ghost, touching framed photographs, rereading his old notes, waiting for the ache to dull. But amid all that silence, one memory would not leave me alone: the woman at the funeral. Her face haunted me. The sadness in her eyes hadn't felt like the sorrow of a distant friend or a passing acquaintance. It was deeper, heavier, almost intimate. And those children, how they stood close to her, how they avoided looking at anyone, as though afraid of being recognized. Who were they? And why did their presence feel so significant, like a puzzle piece I had never realized was missing? 3 days after the funeral, as I sat by the window with a cup of untouched tea, I saw her again. At first, I thought grief was playing tricks on me, but no. The figure outside on the sidewalk was real, the same woman. She wasn't dressed for mourning this time, but there was something about her that made my stomach twist. She lingered near the gate, looking toward the house with hesitation, almost as though she wanted to come in but couldn't. I froze, my heart pounding. What was she doing here? I pressed myself closer to the curtain, watching as she glanced around nervously, then turned to walk away. Impulse overtook me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I put down the cup, slipped on my shoes, and rushed outside. "Wait!" My voice cracked, raw from disuse. The woman stopped in her tracks. She turned slowly, her expression cautious, guarded. Up close, I noticed lines around her eyes, the weariness of someone who had carried burdens too long. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked like she had expected it. "I saw you," I said breathlessly, my words tumbling out. "At the funeral." "Who are you?" For a moment, she didn't answer. She just studied me, her eyes soft but full of something I couldn't name. Sorrow, perhaps, or guilt. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, deliberate. "My name is Laura." It was simple, but the way she said it made the air between us feel heavy. "Did you know my father?" I asked. She hesitated, and in that hesitation I felt the world shift. Her silence was louder than words, and in that instant I knew. This was not just some distant acquaintance. "I knew him," she said finally, her tone breaking slightly. "For a long time." My throat tightened. "How? How did you know him?" Her eyes flickered with something, pain, maybe shame. She glanced down at her hands, clasped tightly in front of her, then back at me. "Not here," she whispered. "This isn't the place." The unease that had been quietly simmering inside me since the funeral now erupted into something sharper, hotter. My instincts screamed that whatever she had to tell me would change everything. And yet, against all reason, I wanted to know. "Then where?" I demanded, my voice trembling more from fear than anger. Laura looked at me for a long moment, as though measuring whether I was ready. Then she nodded slightly toward a cafe down the street. "Tomorrow. Meet me there at 3. I'll explain." And before I could say anything else, she turned and walked away, her figure retreating until it disappeared into the crowd. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my heart racing. My father's funeral had been hard enough, but now something darker was creeping in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, her words replaying in my mind. I knew him. For a long time, what did that mean? What secrets had my father carried to his grave? Tomorrow, I would find out. The next day seemed to stretch endlessly. Every tick of the clock felt like a drumbeat in my chest, each second bringing me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to face. I tried to distract myself, answering condolence emails, helping my mother with small household tasks. But my mind kept circling back to the same thought. What did Laura mean when she said she knew my father for a long time? By the time I left the house, my hands were clammy, my pulse racing. The cafe she had mentioned was small and tucked away at the corner of a quiet street, the kind of place my father had never taken us but might have passed by 100 times. I wondered if he had ever sat there, with her. I pushed the door open, the smell of roasted coffee beans wrapping around me. The cafe was half empty, a few students hunched over laptops, a couple talking quietly in the corner. And then I saw her. Laura sat by the window, her posture tense, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. When her eyes met mine, something passed between us. Recognition, hesitation, maybe even fear. I sat across from her, my throat dry. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally, I broke it. "Tell me," I whispered. She looked down at her cup, then back at me. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Your father was part of my life for more than 20 years." The words landed like a stone in my stomach. I stared at her, struggling to process what she had just said. "What do you mean?" Her eyes glistened. "He wasn't just your father. He was the father of my children." It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My hands gripped the edge of the table. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your father had two families," Laura said, her voice trembling now. "Yours and mine." The cafe around us seemed to fade into a blur, the clinking of cups, the low hum of conversation. It all disappeared as my world cracked open. I could barely breathe. "No, that's not possible. He wouldn't—" But even as I said it, memories flooded me. The late nights at work he never explained. The business trips that always seemed vague. The moments when he seemed distant, distracted, as though part of him was somewhere else. He hadn't been at work. He hadn't been on business trips. He had been with them. My voice shook as I asked, "The children, at the funeral, they're his?" Laura nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Yes, they're his children. Your half-brother and half-sister." The words hit me like blows. Half-brother, half-sister. For 20 years I had believed I knew the shape of my family, the boundaries of my world. Now, in the space of minutes, it had doubled. Why were you at the funeral?" I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. "If this was all some kind of secret, why show up there? Why now?" "Because we had a right to say goodbye," Laura said firmly, her eyes finally locking onto mine with quiet strength. "He was their father too, even if he could never admit it to the world. We couldn't just pretend he didn't exist for us." Anger flared in me, hot and consuming. "He lied to us. To me. My whole life he lied. Do you have any idea what this means? What this does to my family?" Her face twisted with pain. "Do you think it didn't destroy us too? Do you think I wanted this? I loved him, Emma. For years I loved him. He promised me things. But he also loved you, loved your family." He was torn between two lives he could never reconcile. Her words should have comforted me, but instead they cut deeper. He loved us, and yet he still betrayed us. He loved me, his daughter, but still chose to hide an entire family from me. I shook my head, my vision swimming. "I don't know if I can believe this." Laura reached into her bag, pulling out a photograph. She slid it across the table with trembling hands. My breath caught. It was my father, young, smiling, his arm around Laura, the two of them standing together at some park. And next to them, two small children played in the grass. My father's smile was the same one I knew from family photos, but this was not my family. This was someone else's. Proof. Irrefutable. I pressed the photo back toward her, my hands shaking. "Why are you telling me this now?" "He's gone. It's too late." "Because you deserve to know the truth," she whispered, "and so do they." I sat back, numb. My chest felt tight, my thoughts spiraling. My father wasn't the man I thought he was. He hadn't just betrayed my mother, he had betrayed me. When I finally found my voice, it came out broken. "I don't know if I hate you or if I hate him." Laura's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Hate me if you must. But don't hate them. They didn't choose this. They just lost their father, too." I left the cafe in a daze. The photograph burned into my memory. Laura's words echoing in my ears. My world had split in two, and I didn't know if it could ever be whole again. The night after meeting Laura, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the room shifting as the hours dragged by. My father's face kept flashing in my mind. Not the man in Laura's photograph, but the man I thought I knew. The one who tucked me in at night, who clapped the loudest at my school recitals, who taught me to drive in the empty church parking lot on Sundays. And now, that same man was also someone else. Someone who had spent 2 decades splitting himself between two families, weaving a life of secrets. By morning, I felt like I was unraveling. My mother had retreated into silence, locking herself in her room for most of the day. My brother avoided the house entirely, which left me alone with the suffocating weight of questions. That's when I decided. I needed proof. Something tangible, undeniable, that could tell me who my father really was. I went into his study. It was a room that had always seemed off-limits, even when I was a child. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and old books, his scent still clinging to the leather chair and the wooden desk. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, spilling through the blinds. For a moment I felt like an intruder in my own home, but then I remembered Laura's voice. He was their father too. I began to search. At first I found the things I expected: financial ledgers, tax returns, client files from his job. All neat, orderly, as though he had wanted to present the image of a man with nothing to hide. But the more I dug, the deeper I went, pulling out drawers, flipping through folders, the more I noticed cracks. Receipts from restaurants in parts of town he had no reason to be. Hotel bookings under his name, sometimes just for a night, sometimes for weekends away. Always during times he had told us he was traveling for work. And then I found it. At the very back of a drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old magazines, was a plain manila envelope. My hands trembled as I slid it open, my breath catching when I saw what was inside. Photographs. Dozens of them. My father with Laura. My father with the children. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, summer picnics at the lake. In every photo he looked comfortable, happy, even proud. The way he had looked at me in my childhood photos, he now looked at them. I dropped the pictures onto the desk, my vision blurring with tears. It was undeniable. He hadn't just been a visitor in their lives, he had been present. Next, I pulled out a stack of letters bound with a rubber band. Most were handwritten, in his careful script, addressed to L. I forced myself to read, though each word cut deeper than the last. I wish I could spend more time with you all. The hardest part of this life is pretending I don't have two hearts. The children looked so happy today. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. Tell them I love them. Someday, maybe, they'll understand why I couldn't be there all the time. My stomach churned. He had written them the same words he used with us. He had told us we were his everything, and then turned around and told them the same thing. How many times had he left me sitting at the dinner table waiting while he was celebrating a birthday with them? How many soccer games of mine had he missed because he was at theirs? I shoved the letters back into the envelope, my hands shaking so badly I could barely close it. My chest felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out everything I thought I knew and replaced it with emptiness. Then I saw something else. A second envelope, smaller, marked with my father's handwriting. On the front, he had written one word: for Emma. My breath caught. My name. I sat on the floor, the envelope trembling in my hands. Inside was a single letter. His handwriting was uneven, as though written quickly, perhaps in secret. Emma, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and the truth may already be reaching you. I need you to know that my love for you and your brother was real. Nothing about that was a lie, but I also loved them. I couldn't choose, so I tried to live both lives. I know I've left you with pain and confusion, and for that, I am deeply sorry. Please don't hate them for my mistakes. They are innocent. Just as you were, tears blurred the ink as I read his words again and again. He had known. He had known this day would come when the walls of his carefully constructed life would collapse. And even in his final words, he hadn't denied it. He admitted everything. I sat there for hours, surrounded by photographs and letters, the truth pressing down on me from every angle. My father had been two men, the father who raised me, and the father who hid from me. Both were real. Both were him. and now I had to decide which one I would remember. For days after finding the photographs and letters, I felt like I was living inside a storm. The proof was everywhere, spread out across the desk in my father's study, spilling from the manila envelopes onto the floor. Every time I walked past the room, my stomach turned, because I knew what was waiting for me in there. Evidence that the man I loved most had been living a lie. At first, it was grief that swallowed me whole. I cried until my body ached, until there were no tears left. But after grief came something darker, something sharper. Anger. It started quietly, an ember in my chest that I tried to ignore, but soon it grew, consuming me with questions that had no answers. How could he do this? How could he look me in the eyes, tell me I was his pride and joy, and then go spend the same moments telling another daughter the same thing? How could he betray Mom, betray all of us, and still smile at the dinner table as if nothing were wrong? I replayed memories over and over, searching for cracks. The nights he said he was working late, the birthdays he missed because of business trips, the weekends when he came home distracted, as though part of him was still elsewhere. At the time, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my father, the person I trusted most. Now every memory felt poisoned. I wanted to scream at him, but he wasn't here. The anger had nowhere to go, so it turned inward, eating at me. I slammed drawers, tore papers, paced the floor at night until my legs ached. Sometimes I thought I might shatter into pieces, my fury too big for my body to hold. One evening I finally broke. I stormed into his study, slamming the door behind me. I grabbed one of the photographs, the one where he stood with Laura, his arm draped casually around her shoulders, his smile warm and easy, the same smile I thought belonged only to us. My hands shook as I stared at it. "Why?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Why wasn't I enough? Why wasn't Mom enough? The photo offered no answers. None of them did. I hurled it across the room, watching it skid across the desk before fluttering to the floor. The sound was small, but it felt like an explosion inside me. I wanted to burn it all, the pictures, the letters, the proof. I wanted to erase the second family from existence, to go back to the time when I believed my father was just mine. But no matter how much I wanted to destroy it, I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew the truth would remain, even if the evidence was gone. The next day, I snapped at my mother. She was folding laundry at the kitchen table, moving mechanically as though tasks could keep her sane. I blurted it out, my voice sharper than I intended. "You knew, didn't you?" Her hands froze mid-fold. She looked up at me, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" I slammed the envelope of letters onto the table. This, all of this, his hotel receipts, his photographs, his letters to her. "Did you know?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "Emma, I swear to you I didn't." I had suspicions sometimes. Yes. He worked late, he traveled too often, he came home distracted, but I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted to believe him. Her voice broke, and she clutched the laundry like it might anchor her. I loved him, and I chose to trust him. Her words didn't soothe me. They only made the anger boil hotter. You chose to trust him, and he chose to lie. Over and over. To both of us. To Michael. To everyone. He built his entire life on lies, and we were too blind to see it. I stormed out before she could answer, slamming the door behind me. My chest heaved, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. For the first time in my life, I hated my father. I hated him for betraying us, for choosing silence, for leaving us with this mess after his death. But most of all, I hated him for making me question everything. Because if my father could live a lie for 20 years, then what did I really know about anyone? The anger didn't fade. If anything, it kept building, bubbling under my skin like boiling water. I couldn't keep it locked inside anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smile in those photographs, their photographs, and the faces of the two teenagers standing beside Laura at the funeral. They weren't strangers, they were part of him. Which meant, whether I wanted to accept it or not, they were part of me too. The thought gnawed at me until finally I decided I had to see them again. Not from across a graveyard, not in faded pictures, but face to face. It wasn't hard to find them. One of the receipts I'd discovered in my father's desk had an address scribbled on it, barely legible. I had stared at it for hours before finally working up the courage to go there. The handwriting was his. I knew it as well as I knew my own. The next afternoon, I drove across town, my heart pounding with every passing street. The neighborhood was different from ours, quieter, less polished, but not unfriendly. Children played on sidewalks, neighbors chatted on porches. It felt ordinary, normal, the kind of place where families lived simple lives. I parked outside the house, staring at it through the windshield. It was small, painted a soft blue with flowers growing along the fence. A basketball hoop leaned slightly over the driveway. It wasn't grand, not like the home my father had provided for us, but it was theirs. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, my palms damp with sweat. 1,000 questions ran through my mind. What if they hated me? What if they blamed me? What if meeting me only deepened their grief? Finally, I forced myself out of the car and walked up the path. My hand shook as I raised it to knock. The door opened almost immediately. Laura stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "You came," she whispered. "I need to see them," I said, my voice firm despite the fear in my chest. She hesitated, then stepped aside. I entered the house, my heart thundering as I crossed the threshold into the life my father had hidden from me. The living room was cozy, filled with family photos, worn furniture, and the faint smell of vanilla candles. My gaze immediately fell on the photographs lining the mantel. My father's face stared back at me in picture after picture, holding the boy as a toddler, smiling with the girl at a school play, laughing at a picnic. Proof of years I had never known, moments I had never shared. "Emma," Laura said softly, "this is Anna and James." I turned. The two teenagers stood in the doorway, watching me with wary eyes. Anna, the girl, looked about 16. Her hair was dark like mine, her eyes sharp, guarded. James was younger, maybe 13, his expression softer but uncertain. For a moment, none of us spoke. The air was heavy, charged with something unnameable. Finally, Anna crossed her arms, her voice cold. "So you're her." I swallowed hard. I don't know what that means." "You're the other daughter," she said bluntly. "The one he always went back to. The reason he couldn't be here all the time." Her words hit me like a slap. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. He never told us about you." "He never told me anything." Anna's jaw tightened. "He told us about you. Not much, but enough. He said you were lucky. That you had the life he couldn't give us." James shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "Anna," he began, but she silenced him with a look. I felt my chest tighten, tears pricking my eyes. "I didn't ask for any of this. I loved him too. I thought I knew him, thought he belonged to us. And now I find out he belonged to you as well. I don't know what to do with that. I don't even know how to feel." Silence fell again. Anna looked away, her face hard, but I caught the glimmer of tears in her eyes. James, on the other hand, stepped forward, his voice quiet. "He was our dad," he said simply, "and now he's gone. Maybe we shouldn't hate each other for that." My throat closed up. The boy's words pierced through the anger, the confusion, the chaos. He was right. Whatever lies my father had told, whatever choices he had made, none of this was our fault. I nodded slowly, wiping at my tears. "You're right. None of us chose this. But maybe we can choose what happens next." For the first time, I felt the faintest glimmer of something other than anger. Something like possibility. The drive home from Laura's house felt endless. The streets blurred past, but I hardly noticed them. My mind was replaying every moment of that meeting. Anna's sharp words, James's quiet plea, Laura's watchful eyes. My emotions churned like a storm I couldn't control. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't get out of the car right away. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, my forehead pressed against it, my chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. I had wanted answers, and now that I had them, I felt no relief. If anything, the weight pressing down on me had only grown heavier. Inside the house, everything looked the same. My mother was in the kitchen, moving mechanically as she prepared dinner. My brother's shoes were by the door, meaning he was upstairs, probably locked in his room again. On the surface, life continued as if nothing had changed. But for me, nothing would ever be the same again. I went straight to my father's study and shut the door behind me. The letters and photographs still lay where I had left them, silent witnesses to everything I had uncovered. I picked one up, a picture of him holding James when he was just a baby. His face glowed with pride, the same way it had glowed when he held me in my baby pictures. The realization cut deep. He hadn't loved one family more than the other. He had loved us both, and in trying to have everything, he had betrayed us all. The anger returned, hot and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to tear the photograph in half. But then I thought of James's eyes, so much like mine, filled with confusion and quiet hope. I thought of Anna's voice, laced with bitterness, but also with hurt that mirrored my own. They hadn't asked for this either. They were just children, my father's children, my half-siblings. And that's when the conflict began. Part of me wanted to slam the door on them, to pretend they didn't exist, to protect myself from more pain. If I rejected them, I could cling to the version of my father I had always known, the man who was only ours. That part of me whispered, "If you let them in, you'll lose what little you have left of him." But another part of me couldn't ignore the truth. Blood is blood. They were my family, whether I wanted it or not. And maybe, just maybe, building some kind of bridge between us was the only way to heal. The thought of telling my mother made my stomach twist. She already looked like she was barely holding herself together. What would happen if I told her I had met them, spoken to them? Would she see it as betrayal? Would it rip her apart even more? And what about Michael? My brother had already grown cold and distant since the funeral. He hated even speaking about Dad, and I couldn't imagine how he would react if I mentioned Anna and James. Would he turn on me? Would I lose him too? The questions circled endlessly, leaving me exhausted and restless. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. On one side of me was the family I had always known, fragile and broken, but still mine. On the other was the family I had just discovered, strangers bound to me by blood, waiting silently in the shadows of my father's lies. I couldn't keep both, could I? It felt like choosing between memory and truth, between clinging to the image of the father I thought I knew, or accepting the man he really was. As dawn broke, I realized something. There was no choice that wouldn't cost me something. Whatever path I took, someone would be hurt. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all. My father had left us to deal with the wreckage of his secrets, forcing me to carry the burden of decisions he should have made while he was alive. I closed my eyes and whispered into the stillness, "Dad, why did you do this to us?" But just like always, there was no answer. Only silence. The days that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever lived through. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper his name. Every photograph on the wall felt like an accusation. My father's presence was everywhere, but so was his absence, and I couldn't reconcile the two. I avoided Laura's house. I avoided Anna's sharp eyes and James's hopeful ones. But no matter how hard I tried to shut them out, they were there, inside me. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was guilt. Guilt that they had lost him too, that they were grieving just like I was, and yet they had no place at our table, no seat in our home. One evening, I sat with my mother in the living room. The TV was on, playing some forgettable sitcom, but neither of us was really watching. The silence between us was thick. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to confess that I had met them, that I had seen our father's other children, that I had spoken to them face to face. But when I looked at her, her face pale and drawn, I couldn't do it. How could I add more weight to the grief she was already carrying? Instead, I carried it alone. That night, I pulled out the letter he had written for me, the one I had found in his desk, marked with my name. I read it again, over and over, as though searching for instructions, for a way forward. Please don't hate them for my mistakes. They are innocent. Just as you were, his words seared into me. Innocent. They hadn't asked for any of this. They didn't ask to be born into secrecy, to live in the shadows of my father's double life, just like I hadn't asked to be lied to. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears soaking the page. For the first time, I realized that clinging to anger wouldn't give me peace. It would only deepen the wound he had left behind. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my brother. Michael hadn't spoken much since the funeral. He ate quickly, his eyes fixed on his plate, avoiding me. But something inside me snapped. There's something I need to tell you, I began, my voice trembling. He looked up, wary. What? I met them. The words fell out before I could stop them. Dad's other family. Laura. The kids. His fork clattered onto the plate. His face turned pale, then red. You what? I had to, I said quickly. I needed to know the truth. And they deserved to be seen. They're just kids, Michael. They lost him too. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. Don't you dare defend them. Don't you dare make this about them. He lied to us, Emma. He betrayed us. And now you're telling me you're choosing them? I'm not choosing anyone, I said, my voice rising. I'm trying to survive this. And pretending they don't exist won't make it go away. He shook his head, his jaw tight. If you let them into your life, you'll destroy what's left of this family. With that, he stormed out, the door slamming behind him. I sat there shaking, my heart pounding. His words cut deep, but they also clarified something for me. The choice wasn't simple. It never would be, but it was mine to make. Later that day, I drove back to the quiet neighborhood with the blue house. I parked outside again, staring at the flowers along the fence, the basketball hoop leaning slightly to one side. My stomach twisted with nerves, but this time, I didn't turn the car around. I stepped out, walked up the path, and knocked. Laura opened the door, surprise flashing in her eyes. Behind her, I saw James glance up from the couch, and Anna watching warily from the stairs. I don't know how to do this, I said, my voice breaking, but I want to try. And in that moment, I knew. This was my choice. To stop running from the truth, to stop letting anger define me, to open the door, just a little, to the possibility of healing. When I stepped inside Laura's house that day, everything felt foreign and familiar all at once. The walls were painted in soft colors, family photos lined the staircase, and the smell of baked bread lingered in the air. It was an entirely different world from my own home, yet the presence of my father was inescapable. His face smiled back at me from framed photographs with James and Anna, just as he had smiled in ours. Laura led me to the living room, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured for me to sit. James gave me a tentative smile, clutching a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. Anna didn't move from her spot on the stairs, arms crossed tightly, eyes full of suspicion. The tension in the room was suffocating, but beneath it, I felt something else. An opening, fragile but real. I didn't come here to forgive him, I said, my voice unsteady but firm. And I'm not here to pretend that what he did was okay. But I also can't ignore the truth. You are his children too, and that means, somehow, you're part of me now. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Laura's eyes softened with tears. That's all I could ever hope for, that you'd see them not as rivals, not as replacements, but simply as what they are. Innocent James broke the silence next. Do you want to help with the puzzle? He asked shyly, sliding one piece toward me. It was such a simple gesture, yet it broke something inside me. I sat down, placed the piece carefully into its spot, and felt an unexpected warmth spread through me. Anna, however, wasn't ready. She stepped down a few stairs, her voice sharp. "You think you can just walk in here and suddenly we're family?" "It doesn't work like that." I met her glare, not with anger, but with honesty. "You're right. It doesn't. This will take time. And maybe you'll never want me in your life. But I'm here. If you ever decide you need me, I'll be here." Her eyes flickered, still hard, but less certain. She didn't reply, but she didn't walk away either. That evening stretched longer than I expected. We talked in fragments, filling the silence with small details, favorite foods, childhood memories, bits of stories that revealed how parallel our lives had been. At times, the pain was overwhelming, realizing he had lived two lives so seamlessly, weaving love into both without either side knowing. But at other times there was a strange sense of comfort. We were different, yes, but also bound together by the same wound. When I left, Laura hugged me lightly, as though afraid I might vanish if she held too tight. James waved from the doorway, clutching the finished puzzle in his hands. Anna lingered on the porch, watching me leave, her expression unreadable. Driving home, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a step toward it. I realized that clinging to anger had kept me frozen in grief, trapped in the image of the father I thought I knew. By facing the truth, by choosing to acknowledge his other family, I was finally moving forward. That night, I sat down with my mother. My heart pounded as I told her everything, about the meeting, about Laura, about the children. Her face grew pale, her lips pressed tightly together. At first, she said nothing. Then slowly she whispered, "He's gone, Emma. And nothing will undo what he did. But if this brings you even a shred of healing, then I won't stand in your way." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I nodded, relief flooding me. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized the truth. My father had left behind a legacy of lies, but also of connections. It was up to me to decide whether those connections would break me or help me rebuild. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. But it wasn't the same rhythm I had known before my father's death. It was different, heavier in some ways, lighter in others. I still woke up some mornings with the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest, memories of his laughter and his stories poisoned by the knowledge of everything he had hidden. Yet alongside that ache, there was something unexpected, a fragile thread of connection, weaving its way through the wreckage. Laura and I began to exchange messages every few days. Short, careful at first. Updates about James's soccer games or Anna's latest school project. In return, I'd tell her about my work, about my mother's quiet resilience, about how Michael still refused to acknowledge their existence. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it wasn't silence either. James grew bolder with each meeting. He would ask me questions about our father, what his favorite color was, how he laughed when he told bad jokes, what kind of music he loved. Every answer was like a stitch, slowly mending a tear neither of us had caused. He was piecing together the image of the man who had abandoned him while still trying to honor the man he believed in. Watching him do that gave me strength to do the same. Anna remained distant. Her walls were high, her trust buried deep beneath anger. And yet, I saw glimpses, moments when her voice softened, when her gaze lingered a little longer. She wanted to believe me, even if she couldn't admit it yet. I understood, because I was still struggling to believe myself. At home, the tension with Michael grew worse. He couldn't forgive me for opening the door to them, as he called them. He thought I was betraying Mom, betraying him, betraying the version of our family he was desperately clinging to. But the truth was, that version of our family had already been shattered long before I found the courage to face it. One night, after another fight with him, I sat outside on the porch with my mother. The air was cool, the stars faint in the distance. She held my hand, her voice quiet. "You're stronger than I am," she admitted. "I can't bear to see them." "Not yet. But you're doing something I never could. You're choosing to face the pain instead of hiding from it." Her words stayed with me. For so long I had seen myself as the broken one, the daughter betrayed, the sister caught in the middle, the woman forced to carry the weight of her father's choices. But maybe she was right. Maybe facing the truth, instead of burying it, was its own kind of strength. The real turning point came on my father's birthday. For years we had celebrated it with cake, laughter, and his ridiculous off-key singing. This year, I decided to do something different. I invited Laura and her children to the cemetery. My mother chose not to come, and Michael refused to even speak to me about it, but I went anyway. We stood together by the grave, two families that had once been kept apart, now bound by grief and honesty. We didn't bring balloons or flowers. Instead, James read a poem he had written. Anna stood silently with her arms crossed, but tears glistening in her eyes, and I whispered a quiet prayer, not for forgiveness, but for peace. In that moment, I realized something profound. My father's choices had broken us, but they didn't have to define us. We could choose what came next. The path ahead wasn't simple. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Healing is not a straight line. It bends, it stalls, it hurts. But standing there with them, I knew that I no longer wanted to live in denial or bitterness. I wanted to move forward, even if every step was difficult.